And I guess I should introduce myself as well. My name is Victoria, and I am a Habitat Program Manager here at the Canadian Wildlife Federation. As we're talking about where we're all joining from, I'm here at our head office in the nation's capital in Ottawa. And I'll also take the time to acknowledge the traditional Indigenous territories in which we're gathering from today. So here in the nation's capital, we are on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. So if you don't know the land in which you're joining us from today, there's a really great website called nativeland.ca, and it's an interactive map that can help you determine the land that you are on. And I encourage you to do that if you don't know after a webinar, and reflect on the relationships that we have with Indigenous peoples and also the relationships that we have with the land in which we work. So I see some chats coming in. Hi, Daryl from York Region, Mary Lynn from Niagara Falls. Ooh, we have some representation from the US as well, which is great. Let's see, also from St. John. So we have one coast from Canada, from Ottawa as well. This is really great. We have people joining from not just across the nation, but to our neighbors as well. From Moncton, Rhode Island. So we have another person joining from the US. Fantastic. I'm very happy to see all this coming in. All right. So I expect that we'll still have some others joining in as we go, but I'm just going to do a quick review here of the Zoom platform just so everyone's comfortable. I hope by now that with all these webinars and sorts of things online that we're probably pretty comfortable, but just in case, if you're having any audio issues, please just check the audio settings on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. So just ensure that Zoom has permissions to access your speakers or your headphones. You can see you're already using the chat function, so that's really great. And feel free to send me a message if you're having any technical issues. And during the presentation, I'll do my best to help you with that. And we will also leave time at the end of our presentation today for questions and answers. So there is a little button there for that as well. So I just ask that instead of leaving a question in the comment section, to put it in the Q&A just so we can have them all in one spot. And if you were not here just when we first joined, this session is being recorded. So we will share that recording at the end of the session, just so you're aware that that's taking place. All right, so welcome everyone again. My name is Victoria, and I am a Habitat Program Manager here at the Canadian Wildlife Federation. So if you are not familiar with CWF, CWF is one of Canada's largest conservation organizations, and our mission is to conserve and inspire the conservation of Canada's wildlife habitats. So we do that in a number of ways, including engaging the public and youth in citizen science. We also have specific conservation projects like those for freshwater, for marine, and we also have specific projects for species at risk. So this can include right whales, but also the monarch butterfly, in which has inspired our project that has brought us here today to this webinar. So this project is our Rights of Way as Habitat program. And the purpose of this project is to work collaboratively with land managers to restore the breeding as well as the migratory habitat for the monarch and the other benefiting pollinator species along energy and transportation corridors. So our presenter today, Tracy, who I'll introduce in just a moment, is going to talk a little bit more about what a rights of way is. But we can think about it as these transportation and energy corridors. And so as part of this team, we have all of these members here, these friendly faces. Hopefully, well, maybe you are not familiar with all of them, but I hope that by the end of our webinar series, this is a three-part webinar series, that you'll get to know all of us here. We have Carolyn Callahan, our senior conservation biologist, myself, Tracy, who I will give a more in-depth introduction to in just a moment, Vince Feisen, who's our GIS analyst, and he'll be presenting a webinar later in the summer, as well as Fallon and Michelle. So like I said, you'll get to see our faces throughout this series. And through this Rights of Way as Habitat program, we have built and are continuing to grow a Canada-wide network of rights-of-way managers, and we also have 2 regional networks, one in Eastern Ontario and one in Southwestern Ontario. So our Canada-wide network is the Rights of Way as Habitat Working Group. And through these networks, we facilitate peer-to-peer knowledge sharing and training opportunities. So those include opportunities like today, where we have this webinar, we have an annual workshop, and we also do in-person training sessions as well. And we also work with rights of way partners, specifically in Eastern Ontario and Southwestern Ontario, to do on the ground restoration. So that's where we're going onto those rights of way corridors, such as roadsides or hydro corridors. And we're doing active or passive restoration. So looking at managing invasive species, planting native wildflower meadows, and reducing mowing. If you're interested and you are a rights of way manager who would like to join either the Canada-wide network or one of these 2 regional networks, you can feel free to send us an email so we can add you to the list. But we also have a new LinkedIn group, and I'll share the link to that in our chat in just a moment, just once I finish doing this little presentation part, and I'll include that there, and you can join there as well for opportunities to network with other rights of way managers, learn about the updated news about Monarch and rights of way, and also about the training opportunities that we have. So I mentioned that this is a webinar series. So this is the first of the 3-part series taking place this spring and summer. So of course, the first one on the page is for today. The next one is taking place a week today. Just note the different time. It's at 12 noon rather than 1 p.m. And that is with Stefan Weber, who is a botanist and restoration ecologist. And he has designed a seed calculator that will assist rights of way managers in selecting a unique and site-specific and appropriate seed mix. And the next webinar is taking place in July with CDRF's GIS analyst Vince Fison on geospatial tools that will aid rights of way managers in their restoration projects. So those next 2 webinars are very much focused for rights of way managers. And if you're interested in joining those, I will also share the link in the chat in just a moment. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for today. So Tracey Etwell is a restoration ecologist on our Rights of Way as well as our grasslands project teams at the Canadian Wildlife Federation. She has a Master's of Science in Fire Ecology and a postgraduate certificate in ecological restoration. So she has an extensive experience with inventorying, planning, and restoring terrestrial, as well as riparian and wetland habitats in Canada. So I will pass things on to Tracy. And please just bear with me while I'm working with the tech here.
Thanks, Victoria.
Okay, no problem.
And I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, great. And everyone can see my screen?
All looks good.
Awesome, great. Thanks for the introduction, Victoria. Yes, my name is Tracey Etwell, and I am the restoration ecologist on the CWF Rights of Way Habitat Project. And I'm based in Ottawa, where our head office is. And today I'm going to be going over our results from our monitoring program that was conducted last summer and giving you the results of that. I went too fast. Okay, so just some of the topics I'm going to be talking about. I'll give you a general overview of rights of way. We're going to talk a bit about the protocol that we set up, and then going into the Pollinator Scorecard, which is the main tool that we used. We'll talk a bit about the habitat quality results of different sites, nectar results of different sites, milkweed results, and ultimately the weed composition results at the different sites. So just as a basic overview, I'm assuming a lot of the listeners are already familiar with rights of way and what benefits they can provide. So some of the basic rights of ways that we're looking at here: roadsides, pipelines, power utilities, solar and wind farms, and even recreational pathways can be very valuable rights of way in the habitat in terms of landscape. So some of these ecological services from these native meadows, obviously they're great habitat for all our wild pollinators. This includes pollinator services for both the native bees as well as the European honeybee that most people are familiar with. Some other services include attenuation and reduced roadway runoff. So all of that vegetation helps slow down that floodwater. It can also act as a natural snow fence along roadways when we have heavy snowfall. It also slows down that snow from moving and blowing across roadways. Something else we're particularly interested in is carbon sequestration, seeing that these meadows are composed of mostly native perennial vegetation that puts down deep roots. It can be a great way of keeping carbon sequestered into the soil. And one of the other aspects from the economic side is it can result in lower maintenance costs, which can be a great boon for municipal and counties' budgets. So getting into our management techniques here, we were trying to test the roadside management techniques that were employed in two different areas, in Lanark and Leeds and Grenville. A lot of municipalities use boom spraying and some form of mowing to control weeds along their roadway, or even just general vegetation. So we picked a number of plots in Leeds and Grenville County, which is just to the west of Ottawa, and some hydro-seeded sites that were done by the County of Lanark, also just to the west of Ottawa, and some light intensity sites, or so we called light intensity ones where they just do spot spraying or spot pulling of individual plants by volunteer crews. So we had some of these three different types of sites going on, and we wanted to compare them and see what pollinator value they were providing for each of those different sites to figure out what would be the best management technique if we were focusing on pollinators. So we decided to go with the Pollinator Scorecard product, and I'll give you an image of what that looks like coming up. And it covers a bunch of different metrics that we look at in the field, including weed cover, milkweed stems, improvement ideas for different sites. And this was developed by the Rights of Way Habitat Working Group in the US. So going back to the monitoring design here, we had 45 sites. So we had 15 boom sprayed, 15 low intensity, and 15 hydro seeded. So wherever construction projects happen or ditches are cleaned out, most places will go back and hydro seed with a green up mix just to revegetate that site and keep weeds down. So this is where an opportunity where native seed can be put down. So in this case, under these hydro seeded plots, that's what happened in these particular sites. So as mentioned, the Leeds and Grenville sites were boom sprayed, which is a standard practice for many places. Lanark had hydro seeded and those low intensity sites. So surveys took place in late June, mid-July, and late August and September. And the reason there was three different surveys was to try and cover off the different plants that occur during those three different windows, sort of three different flowering seasons. So you have sort of early species, you have mid species, and then you have the late fall species, which are your asters and your goldenrods. So they all have value for pollinators, but they're going to provide different amounts throughout the season. So the plots themselves were long linear transects of 70 meters by 2 meters, which was a 140 meter plot. And the reason that the Pollinator Scorecard asks for 140 meter plots, but it can be arranged however you would like. The reason we stretched them out and made them long linear plots is we also had a pollinator expert on our team, and he went out and collected pollinator species. And so in order for him to walk along and use his nets and collect, he had to walk a straight line. So we wanted to match the plants with the pollinator survey. So as I mentioned, we used the Pollinator Scorecard protocol. That was for me exclusively to look at the plants. And then Jill Miranda did the pollinator surveys. So this gives you a little look at the Pollinator Scorecard. I'll just go over it very briefly. It is available on the web, and I believe Victoria is going to put the link into the chat box for that. And basically, it consists of a field protocol that you can use, and you pick what level. So level would be a very basic knowledge of plants that anybody doing fieldwork as a right-of-way manager would be able to use, up to level 3, which is where you have to have a bit of a fairly good working knowledge of native plants to be able to identify what you're looking at. So the example I'm showing you here is from the tier 3. So some of the things that it asks you, one is about the adjacent land use. So is it cropland, is it woodland, is it grassland? So that will kind of change the site conditions that you might have, whether they're exposed, what the nutrient cycle is, those kinds of things. And then moving down to the left, potentially flowering nectar plant cover. So you have to do an ocular estimate of the flowering native plant. So anything that has nectar would be included in here. And depending what category you choose, then you get a score for that section. So for instance, if it was 1 to 5% nectar plant cover, you'd get a score of 1 versus 76 to 100 would give you a score of 30. And then moving to the right, additional habitat resources. So native bunch grasses are great for pollinators. It gives them lots of cover and places to hide. Brush piles are great places for a lot of the native pollinators that will lay eggs. Undisturbed thatch, that also gives them that little cover where they can hide under that thatch. Dead woods and snags, rock piles, more than 1 square bare ground is great, because a lot of the pollinators will use that bare earth to dig into. Plants with holly pithy stems, some species will actually lay their eggs within the pith inside of plants. So that's an important habitat feature. And larval host plants that we're probably all familiar with. They definitely need the milkweed to lay their eggs for their larvae to host. So you basically get 3 points for each of those different aspects. Going to the lower left, number of nectar plant species. So this is looking at the number of species versus the cover from above. So again, you give a score for the category. And then going down to the lower right, number of native nectar plant species. So again, you have to be able to ID, figure out how many species you have, and then you end up with a point for that box. And this is additive as you go through the questions, it's adding up all the scores. So we'll go to part 2. So this is the second page. So abundance of milkweed. So obviously, that's a very important question to know. How many stems are you looking at in the site? Obviously, the more the better. Then moving to invasive species and noxious weed cover, you have to be able to identify those invasives and noxious weed cover to be able to pick what category you're seeing by eye. And then you end up with the score. So for instance, if you have super high weed cover, 76 to 100%, you get a 0 for that. So you're not adding any scores to your point, or points to your scores, because obviously you have a very weedy site. Versus if you have 0% weed cover, then you have a quite clean site. So then you end up with a score of 6 for that section. And then moving down, you see in that gray box, it gives you the habitat quality ratings. So once you've added all the points up from above, you end up in one of those 5 categories. So either needing improvement, basic, moderate, high, or exemplary. And you'll see in our monitoring results, we had no sites that were exemplary. And then the lower box, pollinators observed, just checking off if you see anything. It's not an exhaustive pollinator survey. You're just noting if you happen to see a monarch, which I did a few times. If you can identify beetles and wasps or other bees, then that's great to just check off. So that was the scorecard. And so that was conducted at each of those 45 sites. So here I'm just going to give you some general observations. So the boom sprayed sites we looked at showed little to no pollinator value, which wasn't terribly surprising, because when you'll see some of the pictures, the spray does what it was supposed to do and kills all the broadleaf plants in the area, or a lot of the broadleaf plants, doesn't touch the grasses. So it kind of reduces or almost eliminates all the pollinator and nectar and pollen providing plants. It was very evident where the spray line was, so you could see the line where it ends, and then just beyond that, you could see more native plants, and even monarch eggs I saw on milkweed just behind that line. In terms of milkweed, I only ever came across common milkweed, no swamp or butterfly weed, which I think is probably just an artifact that we're dealing with a roadside, and common milkweed grows so readily. Swamp milkweed likes more wet sites. Butterfly weed is more of a dry, sandy kind of site. But by far and wide in this area of Eastern Ontario, the common milkweed is more prevalent. So looking at those occurrences of milkweed, they were really kind of random, where they were either not seen at all in a plot, or it's a tiny little bit, or we had a huge bunch of milkweed, like in some of the hydro seeding plots I'll show you pictures of. Something else, the fall sampling, we saw a reduction in the number of nectar species diversity, which is kind of expected because you lose a lot of the more diverse species that you might see in the early or mid-summer. And then by the time you get into the fall, you are primarily getting in asters and goldenrods. And you may have fewer of those species, but there's good cover of them. So it kind of results in a lower score in the fall, but it's not really representative that you could say the site now has reduced its quality. Its quality is still there. The low intensity and the hydro seeding plots you'll see are pretty comparable. They're pretty hard to differentiate and say low intensity was better than hydro seeding or vice versa. So those, excuse me, are both good options based on this result. So we'll go into the results of the quality categories. So there was some really super high pollinator scores. So this was a low intensity site. So again, this would be a site where we had volunteers that would hand pull things like wild parsnip, or there was spot spraying going on. So a skilled applicator would come along and just spray on the individual plants that they needed to control versus the whole swath. So this particular site had a score of 57, which is quite good, is one of the highest ones we saw. Another example of a high score, this is a boom sprayed site. So when I say high score, I mean high score in that category. So the boom spray, the highest score we got was an 18, which landed it in the improvement category, which was consistent what we saw across all the boom spray sites. So some examples or some details from the high habitat quality sites, which were the ones that came between 51 and 75. None of the boom spray sites fell into this category. We had 3 hydro-seeded sites and 2 low intensity sites. And as I mentioned, there was nothing in the 75 plus. And in case you're wondering, this is a cute little photo of a monarch egg just hatching. And once they're out of that little clear shell of an egg, they'll eat that for protein and then go on to grow in a fast rate. So I'm going to show you some maps. So you can see in the lower right hand side, sort of the red box shows you sort of the area of Ontario for people who are from further afield. And I'm going to show you the different categories and the results of the pollinator score category that they ended up in. So just keeping in mind that the red means like stop, as in like it needs help or is an improvement. Yellow is the basic ones. Green, if thinking about go, it's getting better, moderate habitat quality. The dark green is really high habitat quality. So you can just keep an eye on the title at the top and we'll go through them. So for this one, you'll see we starting in June, we have low intensity plots here. So these ones you'll see there's quite a bit of green and yellow and only a little bit of red. We're moving to July for those same plots and you're seeing still a lot of green, and we've actually dropped off one of the reds. So that means that as it's moving into the middle of summer, there might be some more species diversity that's coming up, which is good. Then moving into some of our hydro seeding plots, again, you can see quite a bit of greens, some yellows, and only one red in that plot. Going into hydro seeding plots into July, we have about 2 red plots and a mix of green and yellow. And then boom spraying plots in June. So you're seeing quite a preponderance of or dominance of red, and just one yellow that would fall into the basic habitat quality. And then again, the plots in July. So here you've lost that one basic habitat quality. I think that's because the herbicide takes a bit of time to affect the plants, and you're going to have a bit of die off as you move into the summer. So here I'm going to show you a couple of plots, and I know this is busy and there's a lot going on. Basically, you're looking at the number of plots that had either 0 nectar plants, 1 to 5, 6 to 10, or 11 to 20. So as the graph goes towards the right, you're seeing that that's better. You have more plots in that category, because you would like to see 11 to 20 nectar plants, if not more. So you can see the very first rectangle on the left-hand side is the boom spraying site, and it comes up with 10 plots in that 0 category. It moves to maybe about 5 for the 1 to 5 category, and then it kind of disappears off the graph. And then the low intensity and the hydro seeding start to pick up, and you're getting higher numbers of nectar plots in those categories. Again, here we're seeing the number of plots, and oops, sorry. And you can see again the hydro seeding, or the boom spraying, is sitting right at the far left. And then as you move to the right, you're seeing more dominance, higher peaks of the low intensity and the hydro seeding sites. And then here's nectar categories by treatment for August. So again, you have this tall bar graph for the boom spraying, a little bit for low intensity, and then you're getting these really strong peaks for 1 to 5, and then a higher one for boom or hydro seeding and low intensity into the 6 to 10. So ideally, you want these plots to sort of move even to 11 to 20 to have great value for pollinators. This is just a picture of what milkweed looks like after it's been sprayed by the chemical Clearview. So Clearview is a common herbicide that's used by rights-of-way managers, and by label, it is not thought to kill milkweed, but it's thought to sort of stunt it. So it might not be really viable for egg laying for the first year, but hopefully it will recover and come back. So talking more about milkweed, we sort of have a goal that we'd like to see 6 to 10 stems of milkweeds per plot. The results that we did see was that the boom spray sites had little to no milkweed stems. So one had a max of 4, and the average was 0 milkweeds. We had low intensity plots that had a varied amount of milkweed. There was either some that had 0 or 29, and the average was 4.9 stems. Hydro seeding actually had the highest average milkweed stems. So there was again some that had none, but some that had 221 milkweed plants found within that plot. So it varied greatly depending on, I'm not exactly sure what the reason is behind that. We're still trying to figure that out, if it's soil or if it's the technique or nutrient status, but hydro seed does have good potential to produce a lot of milkweed. And then in our picture on the right here, we just have a little picture I took of a milkweed in a boom sprayed site. So you can see that little hole. So there was milkweed or monarch that already had hatched, and it was sort of eating its way through. So there was also a monarch larvae that you can't see that's underneath a curled leaf. So these were just showing that there was still monarch action in that area. This was set back from the spray line. Just to give you kind of a visual of what some of these hydro-seeded milkweed sites look like. So you can sort of identify that light green plant in the foreground in here. And so these are all milkweeds. So this would be set back from the safety zone, and it was seeded, obviously. And you get quite a high number of milkweed stems, which results in a high score of 58 and 68, or sorry, 58 and 60. So moving on to weeds, of course, this is sort of where the whole directive comes from. So we're looking at the average weed score here of these sites. So you're looking at the boom spray having an average weed score of 5.4. And then the hydro seeding and the low intensity are almost matched at 4. So it's quite interesting that even though there is this boom spraying going on, it only resulted in an extra 1.4% difference. So it was just the next category up for less weeds. So really wasn't giving us a huge benefit in terms of weeds. It wasn't a huge winner over the other sites, which is interesting. Only slightly less weedy is another way to say it. So looking at all these sites, we can come to some ideas that we could suggest for factors for improvement. Obviously, weed control, if it can be done in a spot sprayed approach, is a great way to control the weeds. These sites could have in-seeding where little holes are filled with seed, particularly milkweed seed. There could be goals to increase milkweed seed to 4% in a hydro seeding mix as a specification. The fall flowers that I mentioned, the goldenrod and the aster, are very important, but the scorecard does sort of downgrade the score due to the lower diversity of plant species, but especially for us, since we're the last leg of the monarchs before they head south, those asters and goldenrods are very important. So it's just something to keep in mind. Something else we're curious about, I think I mentioned this too, we're looking at whether a site that's adjacent to cropland or woodland is more productive or gives more benefits than the other. We do know that milkweed likes those sunny conditions, and so sometimes maybe if there's shady forest conditions, it's maybe not as productive as it might be elsewhere. And also time, since hydro seeding is important because a lot of those seeds are in the seed bank and it takes time for them to grow and develop, especially native seed can be like on a 2-year, 3-year cycle before all the seed is fully growing in a site. So some other summary points: hydro seeding and low intensity seem to provide the best pollinator quality. But there is a great opportunity to reseed some of these areas with natives after ditch cleaning or construction projects. The hydro seeding did have the highest milkweed numbers. And boom spraying treatments had little to no milkweed, which we saw in the numbers, low nectar, and most low quality habitat categories. So those sites that need improvement. So we need more research into what makes it a high quality hydro seeding site. What are the factors that provide that really high number? So next steps, as I mentioned, we're looking into that hydro seeding factor, and also what things could be done to improve some of those sites to bring the numbers up. We are continuing on with year 2 monitoring this year. So we're going to add on some City of Ottawa sites to look at what they're doing and continue to look at these 3 different treatment approaches. We are also doing some trials with adding a mycorrhiza powder, which you may have heard of in some garden centers, which is supposed to help build up that fungi in the soil to give a preference to the native plants over the weeds. So that's the end of my presentation. You'll see my email address there below. I just want to thank Ontario Trillium Foundation for their support, as well as all of our partners with the County of Lanark, with Leeds and Grenville, and the City of Ottawa for their assistance as well. And I'm open for questions, Victoria, if you'd like to facilitate that.
For sure. Thank you so much, Tracy. I know that I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of your surveying this year as well, and look at it and compare and see what's changed and that. So I hopefully others are looking forward to that. We'll host another webinar at that time too. Okay, so feel free to put in your questions in the Q&A. There's a few in the chat that I'll read out as well. If you would like to ask your question out loud, there should also be a raise hand function. You might have to click on the more button at the bottom with the ellipsis point if you'd like to do that live. But I will start with this one in the Q&A. Do we know what the seed mix was in the hydro-seeded plots?
Yes, we do. We have the city of Lanark has a specific hydro seeding mix that they use, and they're continually looking at that and adding to it depending on what native seeds are available. I don't think I mentioned, but one of the big challenges for this kind of work is the availability of native seed. So finding a grower, finding the volume at the right time, and getting that mix all put together is a challenge. So they're definitely looking at making their seed mix better every year.
Okay, and was there a pre-treatment survey of the pollinator species that were present on the site? So especially regarding the milkweed?
No, so all of our pollinator work, I'm assuming you mean with the actual insects, that was done after the treatments were completed. So like a year after.
And another question is, they're interested to know in how you will share this information with those who are responsible for spraying, as it appears not to accomplish its purpose.
So the way we work with CDF with this program is a peer-to-peer network. So we're trying to establish the best practices for pollinators and provide resources and training and encouragement. This is a big change in management to take on. So it has to come from within, from the mayors and councils and road managers themselves. So they also may have initiatives coming their way about sustainability, about climate change, all those kinds of things. So this kind of work can tie into that greatly. So it's about showing examples of places, how they're doing it, getting managers together so they can talk and sharing that information.
And if I can add on to it, webinars like this are a great way to start the conversation. So hopefully I'm looking in our attendee section, we might have some people who are responsible for spraying that might be able to take what they've learned and share it with their colleagues as well. Let's see here. Does habitat quality take into account the site's ability to actually grow the pollinator species?
So ability to grow, like all of these sites are growing plants already. So they're already growing weeds if left fallow and left untreated. So there's no reason why they can't grow plants as it is. So yes, so that they would all be good candidates for growing. That answers the question.
And we had a question for advice earlier on in the webinar. And they are sharing that their main conundrum is how to take a packed gravel road, so the usual mainstay of a rights of way, and have this hard substrate grow native pollinator plants. Do you have any advice for this person?
So unfortunately, generally we'd advise you to stay away from gravel. Like you say, it is very hard, it's packed. You're dealing with expensive native species. You don't want to just willy-nilly throw those around. The way that we advising people to work in the rights of way patch that's back from the safety zone. So usually there's a meter or two of a safety zone that's mowed for visibility and that kind of thing. So would be the next segment back from that. So it might be the next 4 to 6 meters on the side of the road. So you are looking for roads that are wider, roads that sort of have a flat topography and that are more on the dry side. So not like wetlands where Phragmites and things might be. So yeah, those are where you're going to get the most habitat value out of what you're putting into the ground. And I see another comment about the cost of doing these things. So we have seen municipalities that have seen cost savings by taking these practices on, and then they can funnel those savings into more work, more pollinator habitat. So it doesn't necessarily have to be more expensive. There can be cost savings. But the use of volunteer groups is also a great way for these projects to run.
I'd love to add on to that, the Rights of Way as Habitat Working Group. So we have the Canadian chapter recently formed, but the American Rights of Way as Habitat Working Group is currently working on a feasibility study of the cost benefits, and they're continuing to gather that information. And I think we'll all be really looking forward to having those case study examples to share and learn from. All right, I think that is all of the questions. If you have any questions that come to mind later on, feel free to either email myself or Tracy, and we'll get back to you. Again, we have a recording of this, so we'll be sharing with that after. And we really hope to see you at our next webinar taking place next week. So please stay in touch. And again, thank you to the Ontario Chilean Foundation for supporting our projects. And have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.